music lovers. Welcome to Modern Musicology. And look, you can see us this time. It's amazing. My name is R. Alan Seiler. Right next to me, if you're watching us live, is Stephanie Seymour.
Hello, everybody.
Right below Stephanie is Rob Levy.
Sup?
And next to him is Anthony Williams.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you're listening.
And we are going to be talking about some of our favorite album cover artwork. Now, this is Stephanie's topic. So, Stephanie, why don't you set it up for us?
Okay. This is actually Anthony's topic that I stole unwittingly. Yeah, I had messaged everyone like, oh, I have such a good idea. We'll do album cover art. And then Anthony was like, I know why that sounds like such a great idea and so familiar because I thought of it.
Right.
So we are going to do part 2 of this show later on, and it will be Anthony's show. So yeah, we picked 5 albums each. Everybody picked 5. We're going to go around the horn and round robin it and show our favorite album covers of all time. But I just want to say that so I'm going to start, but my parameters for this are very specific because how can you narrow down, just 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's obviously a personal choice, but it's also, I kind of went with albums from my preteen to like my mid-teen years that when I was really getting into music, some Robs did too, I think, when I was realizing it was more than just like a hobby and it was what I wanted to do with my life, and music was informing everything in my life. So that's how I picked. So I'm starting with, which I still think this is one of the best album covers of all time. It's Elton John's Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Alan's showing the cover art, but this whole thing opens up into a bifold. So it wraps around. I don't know if anyone is seeing this, but it wraps around to the back. So just to set this up, this was designed by a pop artist named Alan Aldridge, and he basically was drawing imagery from the Renaissance painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights. And the original package included 2 amazing booklets. This is with the lyrics booklet. And then another booklet called Scraps, which was basically memorabilia, like review clippings and everything, pictures that they put in there. And the original album also had, which I have the original album, this fantastic poster of the album cover, which I have not ever hung up because I want to keep everything intact. But so I think it's absolutely gorgeous artwork. And what this reminds me of is sitting in my family's living room and listening to this when I was like 9 or 10 years old on my dad's giant stereo with the giant speakers. And I would sing along to it. I learned like every nuance of Elton John's voice and every drum hit. I mean, I could sing this album to you backwards and forwards. And when I open it and look at it, it just brings back that memory. And I have listened to this and looked at this artwork a million times. I think you can probably look at this art and find new things in it every time you look at it, even if you look at it 1,000. I bet you can find Waldo in here, probably. So, he's probably in there. So I just think it's beautiful art for a beautiful album, and it is fantastic. So that's my number 1 pick.
It is Captain Fantastic.
It is Captain Fantastic.
Yeah, I miss the days when artists would put tchotchkes in records, like posters or decals or stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean, these booklets, they're falling apart. I've looked at them so much. The staple thing, it's just falls out when you open the book. So yeah, I agree, Rob. So that's mine. Rob, I'm throwing it to you. Catch.
All right. So I, like Stephanie, went back in time and used my sort of impressionable youth when most of my knowledge of music was what I heard on several places, some of which are hideously embarrassing, like Solid Gold, Kid Ask Your Parents, or American Bandstand, or like Hot Hit Videos when they used to show those on Saturday nights, and then MTV, and then whatever I would see when I'd go to the indie record store by me that was an NME or smash hits or star hits or stuff like that. So I was one of those impressionable little twerps. So this kind of affected me. Also at this point, I had an understanding that album art was pretty cool, and I bought so many albums early on just based on how cool the artwork worked.
Yeah.
We'll get to some of that in a minute. So the first one I've got, which I think Alan's going to throw up in a minute, not throw up, but put up.
Throw
on the
up.
Yeah. Yay. So I picked the Pet Shop Boys actually because the reason why is it's such an anti-album cover, right?
Yeah.
You look at this and they're just like, we're so indifferent. We just don't care. They were doing the video for What Have I Done to Deserve This with Dusty Springfield, and they hadn't come up with an album cover yet. And they ended up getting these pictures taken. Like, well, that's great. We're going to yawn. And it just looks like, Chris Lowe on the left just looks like, please leave me alone. And Neil looks like he can't be bothered. Right. And it's great. It was designed by, the album cover was designed by Mark Farrow, who does all their stuff, but he's also done albums for Spiritualized. And he came out of sort of the Hacienda art crowd in Manchester, and also the Factory Records stuff. So he worked, he's an apprentice of Peter Saville, who we'll talk about in a little bit. But by the time I'm a sophomore in high school, right, I'm kind of interested in art and music, and the album cover becomes kind of interesting to me, right? So I spend all this time liking album covers that are really cool looking, and then this is like, we just don't give two fucks, right? So it's pretty amazing. And then the record itself, everyone says it's a very difficult second album, but it's probably their biggest thing because It's a Sin on it.
Oh,
and What Have I Done to Deserve This in Heart? And then later they re-released it with an extra tchotchke on the inside that was the Always on My Mind single, right? And I just sort of love it. Like, it's a white background. It's, it's black and white. It's very simple. It's very clean. It's very neat. It's very esoteric. Sort of the same thing that people always said about synthesizer music at the time. They sort of wanted to mirror that common perception of what that was. But it also shows that, like, okay, we're putting on tuxedos because, like, you're listening to an album and that's a thing, right? It sort of underscores this idea that listening to the album and listening to the songs in it is sort of the substance of it. That's what you're sort of like getting ready for. That's what you're dressing up for, is to listen to the experience of the record, right? That's kind of what they were going for. And they just didn't really care about the artwork. I mean, I'm sure they did, but they just literally came up with that. And at the time, the label fought with them for days about the album cover. And finally, EMI's like, all right, fine, you win. And everyone thought this is going to be a terrible idea. And it actually, like, is one of the selling points of the record, right? It's one of those records from the 80s at a time when album covers are disposable. It's one from the 80s that you look at right away and you know what it is.
Yeah.
That's a good choice.
So,
that's a
good
one.
choice. I love it because it's so antithetical to what you expect from an album cover. It's great.
Yeah. So that's mine.
Cool.
All right, Anthony.
All right. So my first pick this episode is Judas Priest's Painkiller. Now, I often say the first track on an album is often the statements of intent. This sums up this album's statement of intent so perfectly. Have you ever seen an album cover that screams heavy fucking metal more than this? It's an armored angel driving a flying motorbike that has a dragon's head, right up where the handles should be, chainsaw blade wheels. The earth below is dissolving into this molten mess with the Judas Priest logo rising up from it. And what you then get is arguably the finest heavy metal album of all time. It is, with the exception of one track, a full-on metal assault from start to end. It lets down a little bit during A Touch of Evil, but you see that album cover, you take that disc out or that vinyl out and you put it in the player, and you're immediately met with Scott Travis's thundering drums and that drum intro. And that album cover has told you exactly what you're going to get.
Yes,
it's so true.
And the album delivers.
Oh my God.
Nice, Anthony.
It is one of the most over top, ridiculous covers, but it is so perfect for that album.
Absolutely.
It's also very declarative of just everything they're about, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the first Priest record that I ever heard, and it's like, okay, this is simply they just lay it all out there completely. It's just like, go for it, and that's what I think. That's why I think that's a really cool pick.
You know, and that album ends with a track called One Shot at Glory, and this was the last album they did with Rob Halford on his first run in the band.
Yeah.
And so that really did go out. Blaze of Glory, arguably their best album. And the cover says it all.
Yes.
Yeah. Right now, Alan has more
Oh my gosh. Yes, I
rockin'
do.
for us.
So when we first started talking about this topic, you know, when I think of album cover art and things that are my favorite covers, I always think of elaborate paintings and like fantasy settings and all this kind of, you know, very arty kind of stuff. But Stephanie challenged us to think differently. Think, you know, it doesn't have to be a painting. It could be a photograph. It could be anything. So I started to think, okay, yeah, I you know, if I think photographically, a couple of things immediately came to mind. And one of them, the first one, and you know, sometimes it's like the first thing that always comes to mind anyway, and that is Creatures of the Night by Kiss. And the reason that I love this, not only is it the first album cover that their newish drummer, Eric Carr, who is one of my heroes, appeared on, but this comes after a period where they are really like, they just don't know what they're doing. They don't know what Kiss is anymore. They've done like the Euro pop album, and they did a concept album, and they did the disco flavored album, and they're just all over the place. They're just floundering. And Creatures was an album that was like, we are going to do what we're supposed to be doing. This is Kiss, and you can see it on the cover. It's a photograph, but it's all bathed in these dark blue colors with the white glowing eyes. And after that period, like 3 or 4 year period of just meandering into all sorts of nonsense, they're like, this is like Kiss being serious again. This is them like being low key dangerous again. This is like them coming at you kind of threateningly. And I love it. And it's absolutely perfect for the album because luckily, when you put this album on, it is heavy. It is full of great songs. It is an almost perfect Kiss album. And it was like they came out blazing. They were like, we are tired of the BS. We are going to come out and we're going to give great songs. We're going to give good metal. We're going to, I mean, it's just a solid album. So that was the first one when Stephanie said, you know, it can be a photograph. That was the first thing that came to mind. So
that's cool.
Number one. Yeah.
I really like the color on it too.
Yeah, I do
sort
too.
of dark purplish thing that I think really gives it a sort of like foreboding kind of night. Is it late at night or early morning kind of thing? Right. I just think it sets a mood.
Right.
And they're glowing eyes.
And I didn't notice this until after I had put the slideshow together that I had actually picked the German cover instead of the international cover because they had to alter their logo for anything they release or any tour they do in Germany because their S's look too much like a swastika and they're not allowed to do that. So anyway, German cover, but still
German cover. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Stephanie.
All right. So my number
before you go, I just want to say we do have some people watching live, and anybody who wants to chime in, just drop a comment wherever you're watching and let us know what your favorite album cover is or what you thought of any one of our picks, and we'll get your comment in the show as quickly as we can. All right, Steph, roll.
Okay, cool. So my second pick is X's Under the Big Black Sun. Wow, this is a very first of all, just this was drawn by Alfred Harris. And the sleeve, which I think is just as important sort of as the album cover, the inside sleeve was designed by John Doe and Exene. Here, I'm going to sort of flash the sleeve because it's just these beautiful drawings and they drew out the lyrics as well. This album is it's just the picture is just a stark, bleak, sad picture
Hmm.
that really kind of sets the tone for the entirety of the songs on this record, because much of it is informed by the death of Exene's sister Mary. Some of the songs on the album directly address her death, others not, but they all sort of seem to be written through the lens of that experience. And actually, Exene said that she began writing because her sister Mary was a writer, and Mary gave her a blank book to write in, and that was just the beginning of it all for her. So,
Mm.
although I think there's X has a lot of cool album covers, and I just think that though this one is so dark and kind of,
Yeah.
it's just sad. It's sad, but it's sad, stark, and I don't know, just like there's like a shadow over everything, and I feel like that's how they felt at that time.
Mm.
It's got that Edward Hopper thing going on, right? And it's got like this Edward Hopper sort of later Frank Miller thing, but it's Frank Miller before it was Frank Miller type of thing. It's like very dark, it's very bleak, and you look out the window and it's just like it's a void, right?
Yeah.
And I've heard, like you said, Exene talk about this, and you can sort of feel when you know the backstory of the album, you can feel all of that.
Yeah.
Like the Kiss
I
record,
mean,
it just brings all that atmosphere in.
because the single Hungry Wolf, and then I think that maybe another single was, I don't know if it was Motel Room in My Bed, but I mean those songs don't deal with, but if you're listening to, the third song is Riding with Mary, and then Come Back to Me is a heartbreaking ballad about her sister's death. So there are direct references to it. But if you're just like like maybe you were an MTV viewer then and had no idea because you're like watching Hungry Wolf on MTV,
Yeah.
that the real story is what lies underneath, So anyway, that was my second pick.
There's a technique in art that's called chiaroscuro, which is basically, it means a sharp interplay between light and dark, like light and shadow. And this cover is such a almost textbook example of the chiaroscuro. I think that is absolutely beautiful. It's so
It's gorgeous.
minimalist. Love it.
I know. And it evokes so much,
Yeah. And before we move on to Rob's, we have a comment from Jesse Kilby, who she says, or he, sorry, definitely Jefferson Starship's Spitfire, but close second is Nuclear Furniture. And as a big Jefferson Starship fan, I love both of those covers. Spitfire is, and actually Spitfire was on my list, and it almost made it onto the show. It's got a woman striding the back of a dragon smoking, and it's just incredible. And the Nuclear Furniture one is kind of similar. It's an illustration, but it's kind of similar to that X cover, where it's that very stark contrast. All right, Rob, what you got next?
So let's give a shout out to Caves.
Caves?
Yeah.
Yay, Caves.
A lot of record people type made albums with or in caves. But the one that I like is Echo and the Bunnymen's Ocean Rain, which came out in 1984. This is a cave that's in Cornwall. It is so popular that people will go there today and like rent a boat and like recreate this picture, right? This is from 1984. It's Ocean Rain by Echo and the Bunnymen. The album design with the lettering and sort of the layout was done by Martin Atkins, who's another sort of person of this time that's working through all these things, but he's also got a little bit of, he's done some stuff for Enemy and some other things. And then the photo is by this guy named Brian Griffin. And basically, they wanted a record album cover that would sort of like match their sort of previous records that were all very elemental. Like all their albums, like you look at Crocodiles or Heaven Up Here, or if you look at Porcupine, they're all very much, they all have elements in them, right? So this one is like you have water and you have cave. And they didn't have to do anything to the water. It's naturally lit.
Wow.
That way, where it's just sort of, they got that purple tint by doing it at night. And Bill Drummond, who sort of knows the band, was talking about how in his book and how like they were freezing when they did this. So, but you kind of like it. You get all four of them. They're in a boat. They're just kind of like, got the cool hair and everything. And this is an example of like, I'm going to buy an album because it looks cool. I bought their first album, Crocodiles, because I thought it looked really cool. And I was right. And this one, I'm like, oh, this looks even cooler than that one. So I'm all over this, right?
This is a great album.
And it's also like, you look at this album cover, right? And again, Purple in the House. You look at this album cover, you can tell they have songs like Nocturnal Me and Seven Seas and The Killing Moon and actually Ocean Rain on it. They're all very sort of like dark at night kind of songs, right? It's not goth, but it's like your typical sort of like put on your long coats and go out kind of cold record, right? Again, it just sets a tone. And it sort of has this vibe going on by 1984, this sort of nihilistic kind of thing in British album covers where they're like, we're all going to look gloomy and moody to sort of match the times. So if you like album covers where people look moody and brooding, that is it. And it's one of my favorite albums, actually. I just think that,
such a good album.
Yeah, it's so incredible. And Killing Moon is, again, if you've never heard The Killing Moon, I can't really help you. So that's
who hasn't heard Killing Moon? Such an amazing,
could be people.
Amazing song.
Yeah.
There could be some people. All right, so we've had a couple of covers that are really, really starkly blue. Hey, Anthony, why don't we continue the blue theme?
All right, so our next album cover is Indiscreet by no, not Indiscreet, Propaganda by Sparks. And the front cover of this doesn't tell the whole story, but just before I get into that, the front, back, and inner sleeve covers were all photographs taken by Monty Coles. And I like to think they tell a little bit of a story. So here you have Ron and Russell, the brothers behind Sparks, tied up and gagged on the back of a speedboat. Now, if you look at the back cover, it has them tied up and gagged in the back of a car. And the middle sleeve has them tied up on a king-size bed. Ron is gagged. Russell has managed to get his gag off, and he is trying to call for help. So I like to think that there's a little bit of a story between these. I'm not quite sure in which order they're meant to go. Maybe, they were taken somewhere by car and then tied up on the bed. And then because Russell tried to call for help, they're going to get dumped in the ocean on the front cover. I don't know the order. But
making those stories up.
Definitely a progression.
Exactly. And I think, this is not my favorite Sparks album, although it is a very good one. It's got Never Turn Your Back on Mother Earth. It's got Something for the Girl with Everything. It is produced by Muff Winwood. So this came after their real breakout album, Kimono My House. So this album had a lot to live up to. And again, I feel like the cover art, if you think about it as a full package, is really part of the effort to continue on with the upward swing that had with the previous album.
Yeah, and they very much make their covers at this point an event, which they still do now, right? I mean, it's sort of like Kimono's got that weird sort of cover on it. This one is, less claustrophobic. It's more open because they're out on a boat and, and everything. But at the same time, it totally fits the aesthetic of Sparks, right?
Yep.
Very tongue-in-cheek. Like I talked about the Pet Shop Boys earlier, but like you look at Soft Cell and Pet Shop Boys, and any two people band after Sparks borrowed that tongue-in-cheekness from Sparks, right? And this is like a premier example of them just being like goofy and weird and amazing at the same time.
Yeah. And I would say that I think it's their best album cover.
Yeah.
Mm.
And for a band with, what is it now, like 27, 28 albums, that says a lot. Because they've had some great album covers in that time.
Right. Okay.
Very cool.
So thinking again in the photographic lane, I have gone with one of my absolute favorite covers because it is so stark and I was going to say bare, but that gives away the title. It's Bare Trees by Fleetwood Mac. And this
Oh,
is one of their mid-period kind of albums. It's I think 2 albums before Lindsay and Stevie joined the band, and they become this massive international hit-making machine. But this is still when Danny Kirwan. This is the last Danny Kirwan album before he leaves, and Bob Welch is in the band. So it's one of the few albums where the two of them are on together, and I just think it's an incredible album. I think it is easily as good as the first Fleetwood Mac album with Lindsay and Stevie and Rumors, because it's got strong contributions from all 4 of their main songwriting and singing members at the time. And I love this cover. So the title song, Bare Trees, is a Danny Kirwan song, and the first 2 lines of the song is bare trees, gray light. I just lost the words. Dang it.
Yeah.
Bare trees, gray light. Oh yeah, it was a cold night. And I swear to God that whoever took this picture just listened to the song, heard those first 2
yeah,
lines, and said, I know exactly the picture I'm gonna take.
yeah,
And I love this picture so much. I love the stark nature of it, that it just feels cold.
yeah.
I just think it's so beautiful.
There's something really timeless about this. You know, a band could put out an album with this photograph today, and it wouldn't look dated.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you could easily see some obscure indie band using something like this.
What
Or
you're
goth
saying
band.
is bare trees are eternal.
Yes. I almost picked Rumors. That's interesting. That might have to be on
Oh,
the
yeah,
part 2.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Cool.
very cool cover. Very cool.
Yeah. All
All
right,
right.
Steph.
All right. Well, for my 3rd pick, I am going with also kind of a stark and bleak cover, which is U2's War.
Yes.
Yes. I mean,
I love this cover.
I know. And this is, again, a gatefold album. So if you open it, there you could see his arm kind of extending a little more on the back. But I keep picking gatefolds. But so this little boy here is Peter Rowan, which he's the younger brother of Derek Rowan, who's actually known as, I think it's Googie. I don't know if it's Googie or Gucci, but it's he was in the Virgin Prunes, which is a Dublin band. And his brother Derek was an artist. So they're friends of U2. They were like collaborators with them. So Peter Rowan appeared on their first EP, which is 3, and that appeared only in Ireland. Then he was on the cover of Boy in 1980. And by the way, for that album, he was paid in Mars bars and no money, just candy. And then another shot was also used on the single for I Will Follow. But then, so their record company, which was Island, which I worked at because U2 was on this label, I loved them so much that I had to work there.
Right.
But this is before I was there, obviously. They didn't really get the symbolism, and they were worried that the photo of like a shirtless kid was going to sort of give implications of pedophilia. But they did get with the program. So then by the time War was released, the theme was really set. I mean, he was back. This kid was looking a little more like tougher and like less innocent than he did on the cover of Boy. You know, it's sort of like he's almost like a prisoner against that wall, and which really again fits this album perfectly. This is U2 sort of making like a declaration to the world of who they are. I think their first 2 albums are great and I really love them, but this was like a solid through and through album, and I think they really gained their footing with this album.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah.
We have a comment from our good buddy Chris Coker.
Yay,
says,
Chris!
War. Huh, what is it good for?
Absolutely nothing, my friend.
I mean, that's the answer. So for people watching, Chris Coker, we interviewed him just a couple of episodes back. He has a book out about the Kinks, and we talked all about that book, and it's great, and it should be out in the US very, very soon. So go check him out on Amazon.
Hi, Chris.
All right, Robbo.
So mine, like Steph's, tells a story, and it's also in black and white. we've reached the gloomy photo part of
Right.
the thing. So I picked. Everybody talks about the album cover of "Unknown Pleasures" by Joy Division and how great it is, and it's been nicked off and ripped and modified for countless things. But I'm going with Joy Division "Closer," right? Which, look at that. I mean, come on.
Oh man.
What sunny day is that, right? So a couple things about this record. First, it came out in 1980, right? It's on Factory Records. Factory Records, if you can ever get any of the Factory Records, they treated every bit of an album like it was an event, right? Tony Wilson was like so entrenched in every aspect of it, of being a product, right? So a lot of the records were similar but also different, right? So for this, Joy Division gets Martin Atkins again, who I mentioned before, to do the sort of the graphic design and stuff. And then this is Peter Saville, who is sort of like the godfather of great British album covers, right? And this is a tomb in Genoa, Italy, of the Appiani family, which I'm not sure who they are, right? But it's from an actual tomb. It's a picture of the tomb, right? So this is actually somebody was actually crazy enough to have this be their tomb, right? So it's like, okay, this totally sets the atmosphere for the record. This totally sets the atmosphere for what the songs are going to sound like. But by happenstance, the lead singer hung himself before it came out. Without even trying to underscore the weight of the album, Ian Curtis dies. So you've got this record that has a really stark color. It's got a stark sort of grayish cover on a white background that sort of like very much emphasizes the photo, right? But then you compound that with the lead singer dying, and you just look at it, and it's also this is what you don't get now that you got when we were younger, right, Steph and Alan? Records used to be heavy. So this is one of those records that you lift up, and it's because of the vinyl. It was a heavier grain of vinyl. This is a heavy friggin' record, right? You could feel it. It was like the tactile like heaviness of it is fantastic. And the inside sleeves of it are also thick, like a very thick paper, right? They're not playing around with the budget on this, right? And this sort of starts the run of Joy Division, but as they evolve into New Order of making the album cover a thing, right? Which is a whole separate thing. But for this, just taken as a work of art, that picture is fantastically beautiful, right? It's got this amazing sculpture. It's got this sort of like darkness to it, and the graphics go with it. Like you flip over the back cover, it's very much laid out like you were reading a card catalog, almost sort of like the songs are very sort of definitely, they're sort of like printed in the same way that you look at a cemetery tomb. It's got the same kind of writing on it, right? So it's very methodical, and it's very very dark, and I am probably picking the least cheerful album of the entire night. So that's on me. And, you know, what
We
better
would
to come
expect
after
nothing
Sparks?
else.
Well, no,
Yeah,
what better to come after Sparks than Joy Division, right? So that's my third one.
All right.
All right. Anthony, what have you got for us?
Well, my third choice here is what I think is an all-time classic album with an all-time classic cover, and that is Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell. And there are two sides to this. There's some wonderful back cover artwork as well, but the front, for those of you watching the live stream, you can see this, but for those of you not, is three angels sneakily having a cigarette and playing cards. And this was originally inspired by a photo from 1928 of several women dressed as angels smoking backstage during a break at a college pageant. And I kind of love that they took that inspiration and had this painting done of, you know, even the angels have their vices, right?
Yeah.
So the other aspect of this album is, of course, this was a bit of a relaunch album for Black Sabbath. Ozzy Osbourne had, of course, left in 1979. Ronnie James Dio had come on board. New singer, he'd joined from Rainbow. People did know who he was, but he wasn't Ozzy. So they had to have something that would sell this record and say yes. And, you know, playing with something like Smoking Angels, that's a little subversive. It's going to get a few people upset, get some good publicity. So I think it worked on that. Alan, do you have an image of the back cover as well?
Remarkable that you would ask that question, because this album was almost on my list and I love the front cover, and that was the first thing that grabbed my attention. But the back cover was going to be why I was going to put it on my list, because this charcoal sketch of the band members just blew my mind. I don't know what it was, but like they just look like these arcane wizards that are, that live in the medieval times or something. Like they've just walked out of a castle. And I was like, and then I started reading the song titles and I'm like, I have got to hear this album.
And
I'm crying.
I think
It's funny.
I think what's really cool about that back cover as well is Ronnie had joined from Rainbow, and the final Rainbow album with Ronnie, Long Live Rock and Roll, had a charcoal drawing of the band members. And I can't help but feel that that is a very, very deliberate reference to Long Live Rock and Roll.
Oh, agreed. Absolutely agreed.
All ties it together and ties the history of Sabbath to the history of Rainbow. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay, so now I'm done with photographs and I'm into the big grand paintings. And there is no cover artist that I love more than Roger Dean. And he has done most all Yes albums and every other prog band in the world. So I had no idea what to pick. So I picked a pair of Yes albums that were a part 1 and a part 2. And they're called Keys to Ascension. And they came out in the 2000, around 2000, I believe it was. And like 98 and 2000, I think. And they're both albums are a half live album and half new studio tracks. So it's basically two different albums smushed together to make one 2-part album. It's two disc sets. And Roger Dean does these incredible paintings, this fanciful landscape that just, his work on Yes covers is so iconic that anytime you see a Roger Dean painting, you think Yes, even if it's on a Uriah Heep album or a Asia album or whatever, like it just says, it's just so identifiable with Yes. And these albums were fantastic. These were Rick Wakeman had just come back into the band and they're doing this tour and the band is sounding amazing. And they're playing some songs that hadn't been played live in a long time, or in one case, ever at all before this. But the new studio tracks, they're just incredible. This is some of the best Yes music that had ever been done. So I highly recommend both of these albums, Keys to Ascension 1 and 2, not only for the great music, but because of the really spectacular Roger Dean album covers.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I think Yes albums have a very distinct style to them. You don't even need the logo and the title on that artwork to immediately go, oh yeah, this is a Yes album.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the only reason you need the logo is so you'll know it is a Yes album and not a Uriah Heep album or something else that Roger Dean has been commissioned to do.
Right.
Because they all look like Yes. All right, Steph, you got a good one coming up.
Okay, yeah. And speaking of going with, now back to graphics and art, I have picked Rio by Duran Duran.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It was designed by Malcolm Garrett. This guy also did the cover for the band's first singles and first album, but basically he had no more than a week, he said, to complete this whole design. He didn't even hear the title track of Rio, but he just knew that the album was going to be called that. And it made him think of like Cuban cigars and cigar packaging. So the whole idea of this album, of the cover for him, was sort of like something Latin, something Cuban, South American. And he said he didn't like album sleeves that had an image on the front, but nothing on the back. So I know you don't have a picture of it, but it wraps around to the back. The lines and the magenta and everything goes around. So he said he wanted to wrap it around like that, like a cigar packaging. Now, also, I read that he said that the initial pressings had a physical sticker sealing the LP shut, but honestly, I don't remember that. And I'm holding my original album now. I don't see anything where I might have ripped off a sticker. I
Mhm.
don't know. But anyway, that was also in homage to a cigar, box where you would peel the thing off. So
Yeah.
the band absolutely loved this. And, this sort of followed them over the course of their career, this image. This was real. I mean, you see this and you're just like, that's Duran Duran,
Mhm.
The original painting of this was hanging in the Rum Runners office, which was the club where they really got their fame in England. And then they stole it, and they would each take the art and hang it in their house for a while, and they would rotate it.
But you talk about an iconic cover.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
Gosh,
like,
it's yeah,
you know what that is. There's nothing
right.
else to, everyone knows that you don't have to have the title on there to know what that is.
No. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good one.
And I think even more so than a lot of the records we've chosen, that sort of, you look at that record, you know exactly what decade it is, and you know exactly sort of like what the
Yeah.
vibe is of the people
Pretty
that are going
much
to listen
screams
to it.
1982.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yep.
I also think it's kind of timeless too. I
Yeah, it
mean,
is.
I think that
Yeah.
image
Yeah.
works no matter when because it's so stylistic, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It could go either way. It could go like, Porsche of 1982 or like modern, art.
Right, exactly.
All right, Rob, what do you have?
So I've got another classic one with a photo on it again.
Yay.
Sorry. So it's a little bit of background. This is a picture from the pictures London, the album's London Calling by The Clash, and from 1979. Paul Simonon was they're at a concert, and Paul Simonon's pissed off because they wouldn't let the audience members get out of their seats. They told everyone they had to be seated. So he got pissed and he smashed his guitar up in bits and pieces. And part of that guitar are at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Just saying.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so he smashed it up, right? And there's someone named Penny Smith who followed the band around religiously and took pictures of them. She got a picture of this, right? And this became the cover of London Calling. It was designed by Ray Lowry, who later had a bunch of his artwork and stuff put in the V&A permanent collection and Royal Academy of Art and some other places. So he's kind of a big deal with art, but it sort of, as a harken back to times before, it's basically the font of London and Calling nicks the very first Elvis Presley record, where it says Elvis on the left and then Presley underneath it in the same colors, right? And originally Penny Smith didn't like the album artwork because she's like, well, it's not a great picture, it's blurry, it's out of focus, you can't. And they're like, no, this is perfect, right? This is absolutely perfect. In fact, that album was made a stamp by the Royal Mail when they do classic album covers. So,
wow.
And you can just, when you look at that record, much like Anthony was saying with his, picking Sabbath, you can pretty much tell that somebody's pissed off on that record.
You know what you're
Right.
gonna get. Yeah.
You know
what
exactly.
you're
Yeah. And it's just, it's one of those moments of time where an album sort of, much like the Duran Duran record you picked and the Yes stuff that Alan took, it's like, it's one of those things that like the album art itself is almost more iconic than the record in many ways, right? And it's just a hugely prolific album cover. So there you go.
Yeah. That was one of my second. That would have been a part 2 for me on the show, but it's just iconic.
Yeah.
It really is.
I love that cover so much. And you talk about the photographer just snapping a shot at exactly the right moment.
Exactly.
Like, man, you could not have gotten a better shot than that.
I know. And you think about it then too, it wasn't, she wasn't going digital, snap, snap, snap.
No,
It was like, here, let me snap just in case, and that was it.
Exactly. All right, Anthony.
All right. Well, our next one is Marillion's Misplaced Childhood. And I think anyone who's listened to this show in the past knows my great love for Marillion.
Really? I've never noticed that.
This was painted by Mark Wilkinson, who interestingly had also painted The Painkiller album cover, so I've got 2 of his pieces of art on here, and they couldn't be more different.
Right.
Wow.
The story behind this is quite interesting. This was Marillion's 3rd album, and as they were making it, their singer Fish was kind of going through a bit of a difficult time. He had gone through a breakup recently. There was a lot of pressure from the record company, who wanted the band to become as big as Genesis or Pink Floyd. And effectively, Fish felt like he had to grow up and solve his own problems for them to get there, and kind of said goodbye to his inner child, which kind of led him into a dark place. He ended up going on a psychedelic journey. He took some drugs, as musicians do. And during that trip, there were dark clouds, death was lurking, a magpie had stolen his wedding ring, which was emblematic of the breakup he'd recently gone through, and things looked really dark during this trip. But suddenly there was this guardian angel, the boy in the English soldier's costume, who appeared behind him, and it was that trip that made him realize that you should never let go of your inner child, and you should always cherish that child. And so he told this story to Mark Wilkinson, who found a model to be the kid. The magpie is on there as well. And then additionally, you see a few other things. So there's a poppy on there that really sort of symbolizes life and death. Additionally, there's talk that perhaps this also references Sergeant Pepper and Abbey Road, given the style of the jacket, and the bare feet as the Abbey Road reference.
Yeah.
And then on the back cover, there is a jester climbing out of a window. And the jester had really been Marillion's kind of trademark for the first couple of albums. And this is them saying goodbye to that jester and adopting a new identity. So one thing I really, really love about this album cover is it is just layered with symbolism. And I find that in itself brilliant, but it's really well drawn and painted by Mark Wilkinson. And then, of course, once you put the album in, it's just this amazing, amazing concept album that candidly did exactly what the record labels hoped it would do. Marillion became a huge act with Misplaced Childhood.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a
Have
beautiful
a quick
cover. That's
comment.
really
Yeah, and Daniel Bennett says, cue the quote, drugs have done some good things for us.
yes, Daniel.
Nice one.
Fantastic.
Oh
All right,
man.
Alan.
That was the first Marillion album I ever
Oh.
heard. Well, it was the first, not the first one I ever bought, because that was that EP. I forget what it's called. You know what it is.
Besides
Nathan.
Themselves or Reel to Reel?
I don't know.
Okay. One was the B-sides collection. One was a live EP.
This was not the live one.
Okay.
But yes, Misplaced Childhood was the first full album that I bought. So it was the second thing that I bought. Anyway, that's beside the point. All right. So for mine, I am going. So Styx's Grand Illusion.
Yeah.
I love this cover so much. And this cover painting is based on a painting called The Blank Signature by René Magritte, who was one of the surrealist painters in the early 20th century. And I love this cover so much. It's probably the perfect Styx album. They never bettered it, although they came super close. One album after this, which also had a spectacular cover called Pieces of Eight, an excellent album with an excellent cover. And then in, 2004, I think it was, they did an album called Mission to Mars, which I think those 3 albums are the best and essential Styx albums. But Grand Illusion, oh my gosh, just a lush album. And the whole album, it's not necessarily a concept album, but it does tell a story. And I feel like that the cover doesn't necessarily match up with the content of the songs, but it tells you the kind of album you're going to be listening to. It's very layered. It's very textural. And there's so much here going on, like overlapping each other. And I just think it's so incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Are you not a fan of Paradise Theater?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I don't think
just
it's as
was
good
wondering.
as those others, but
Mm.
it's close. It's
Yeah,
like
that
second tier
yeah.
maybe.
Okay. Just wondering. I love Paradise Theater, but maybe that's just because that was probably the first thing I heard from them, that I
Yeah.
knew was Styx at least.
And that's one of those that's got a really great front and back cover because
Yeah.
it's exactly the same picture, but the one is the theater in its heyday when it's all flashy and colorful, and the other one is after it's closed and it's derelict and it's all in browns and stuff, and it's
Yep.
so great, so great.
Yeah, it's a great album cover too. Yep.
All right, Steph.
All right, last one. My last pick is Bow Wow Wow's I Want Candy. And that's a
Is that the
weird.
right one?
Yeah, that's right, but it just looks so there's tape all over it or something. Is there some? That's so
I
funny.
couldn't find a good
That's
high
okay.
res image
I
except
can
for some
hold
guy
mine
who
up
took a
here.
photo of his copy. So.
Well, as you can see, 15-year-old Annabella was painted in gold. This picture was taken by Jim. I don't know how to say his last name. Variale. I hope, Jim, that I got your name right. I really honestly, it's funny. I was thinking about this. She's 15 here. I want to know what her thoughts now are on this. I mean, I know
Mm,
how they felt. I know they definitely like broke out on their own after this album with when the going gets tough, the tough get going. That was like after they split from Malcolm McLaren, but this is still under Malcolm. And I'm just curious what she would say. I couldn't really find any information about that, but I think it's a beautiful cover. She's obviously all painted in gold. She's nude, but she's not showing any body parts that are,
mhm.
and I just think it's stark, and it's kind of like the jungly kind of feel of their music, like with the beat heavy Burundi beat kind of thing with this whole album. Uh, I just think it fits really well. I don't know. It represents what's on the album. And one last thing I'd like to say about this is that I was thinking about when U2's label was worried about uh
Yeah.
pedophilia with the boy on the cover with his face. Now I was thinking about this, I don't know.
Well, what is that to say about you picking all these covers with underage
I
children?
know I'm
Come
thinking
on,
of all
Stephanie.
these children that are like naked on the cover. What the hell? Well, at least I didn't pick the one before this, which was really, the one where she's 13 and like laid out like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
Next
on
next
the
time we
picnic.
Yes,
in
the
part
picnic.
Mhm.
in part 2, Stephanie's going to be picking Nevermind.
Right. It just goes younger and younger.
Sorry. What's wrong with me? And on
Oh.
that note, what do you got, Rob?
Follow that one up. So I chose Hatful of Hollow by the Smiths. A couple reasons. One, it's the only album that's got a big amount of color on it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're known for their 27 singles and albums or whatever with using interesting artwork and stuff. This is the first Smiths album I ever got. Again, I picked it up at the store and I'm like, man, this is just the design on it is like great. If you get the original one of this one, the inside cover for the sleeve is actually blue too, right? And it's heavy, it's textured, it just feels like something like big, right?
Mhm.
And this album came out sort of as a throw together thing. It's got radio sessions for John Peel and another guy. It's got all of their singles and B-sides up to that point. So it's not really an album of like new material per se, but they've sort of cobbled this together. And I love like the Rough Trade, all the early Rough Trade Records album sleeves are fantastic. But this one, I just love sort of like it's very blue. It's got the black line under the Smiths. It's got the very sort of like very metered Hatful of Hollow at the bottom of it. And then it's designed by Gilles Decroix, who's sort of famous for doing these album covers that are very sort of sterile and minimalist, right? And this one, he kind of steps away from that a little bit. But the picture of the guy named Fabrice Collet, who's a French singer, and he's got a Jean Cocteau tattoo on his shoulder. Now later, when they released this again, it's just his head, and that's what's on the CD and later issues of this. And they got rid of the tattoo on there because they didn't want anybody freaking out about the tattoos. So you can have all the other crazy metal stuff we've been talking about, but people are worried about a Jean tattoo, right? Go figure. But it's not necessarily an album that you look at and you know what it's going to sound like, but you're like, okay, this is going to have like sort of some pastoral guitars or whatever on it, right? And it's going to have kind of a vibe going to it. And I picked this one more for just like more sentimental than anything, but also it's just that blue. I don't know what it is. I just love the colors on that, right? Tonight's episode is brought to you by the color blue.
So apparently, since
Yeah.
we've had so many blue covers
Yes.
this episode.
Yeah, and Fabrice Collette's a sort of quasi-famous French, I think, singer and performer. I don't know very much about him, but again, it's a very sort of rugged and lean and sort of statement kind of thing. Although you don't really know what the statement is because you don't hear it in the music, so it's kind of it's not as finely tuned as some of the other albums that we've had, but the packaging is great. And this is when the Smiths really started thinking about packaging because their first albums kind of got a picture stuff on, but after this, they're off to the races with like design and aesthetic and everything. The Smiths are all about aesthetic, right? Even now, Morrissey's all like aesthetic, right? No meat products, all that crap, right? So this is sort of the beginning of all that. So that's my pick.
All right.
Let's pick
All right, Anthony.
Anthony.
You got a
All right.
scary one.
My last pick for this episode is King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King.
Okay, prepare yourself, viewing audience.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yes.
So this dates from 1969. It is technically a self-portrait of the artist Barry Godber. And the original painting is now owned by Robert Fripp, the guitarist from King Crimson. Godber died in 1970 from an early age heart attack at 24 years old. He never did another album cover. And this is
Wow.
just, to me, such a wonderful kind of representation of that early psychedelic prog period. You know, it's 1979. We're still not too far off, early Beatles, right? We're only 6 years on from Twist and Shout or whatever.
So
And now we're
69.
getting, yeah,
You
this
said
is 60
79.
Sorry, 1969. Yes. I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from COVID. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. But this is just so weird, and I can just imagine someone, aged, I don't know, 17 years old in 1969, buying this because the cover's nothing like they've seen before, and they put the disc onto their LP player, and it breaks in with that and they're probably thinking, what the fuck am I listening to? It's weird and it's brilliant and it's like nothing else that anyone was doing at the time.
Yeah.
And I think I've talked a lot about the album art being part of the overall package with almost all of the records I've talked about, and that very much is the case here as well.
Yeah. It's a
That's
good
an
one.
intense cover. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It
And the
is
back
coming
cover
at
is
ya.
weird as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone for a lot of gatefolds. The back is just as weird.
Mm.
It's also incredibly iconic all these years later too. You know
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
what that record is when you look at it, when you look at that picture.
Oh yeah, there's never been another album that looks like that.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
All
All right,
so,
Alan, over to you.
All right, wrapping it up with
Bringing it home.
quite possibly, I think, the greatest painting I've ever seen on an album cover, and that is Rainbow Rising. Oh my God, look at that cover.
Mm.
This fist of power that's rising up from this like tumultuous sea, grasping a rainbow, and in between like this parting of a mountain range. And holy shit, is this a great cover? Oh
It is
my
so
gosh.
cool.
It is, man. I love it so much. And this is about the time that I was getting into Black Sabbath, was in 1980 when the Heaven and Hell album, which we talked about a little bit ago, came out. And I was just obsessed with Ronnie James Dio, and I had to buy everything that Ronnie James Dio had ever done. So I had all the Elf albums, and I got all the Rainbow albums. And when I first saw this cover, Rainbow Rising, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be my favorite album of all time. It is one of my favorite album covers of all time. It's a great album. I think the production is a little muddy on it, but the music on it is phenomenal. And this cover, look at that cover.
You
Oh
said
my
that
God.
those, I know it, those are mountains, but put that up again because it looks like they're almost like turrets of castles. You know what I mean? Like the
There is
spires.
castle in there too.
Oh,
Yes.
okay,
Up
okay.
toward the back, there
Yeah.
is castles also.
And down in the front, like kind of looks like.
And there's like a little wizard guy, which ties into the last 2 tracks on the album. And yeah, it is. Oh, baby. It is amazing. A couple of final comments. Hang on. We have, hey, my buddy Patrick Anderson says
Yay.
his favorite album cover is Supertramp's Breakfast in America. That is a great one.
Almost on my list.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. Andrew Lavoisier, I'm not sure. I hope I
Lavasseur,
got
that's my
that right.
cousin. Hi, Andrew.
Oh, yeah. Oh, hey, Drew. This is a blast. Loved watching you all and hearing the stories behind the album cover art. Thank you.
Thank you.
And he
Love
also
you,
says,
Andrew.
I learned before retail record stores, before vinyl browsing, vinyl albums were packaged and sold in brown paper bags, kind of like booze. And then he says, hi, Steph.
Hi, best cousin. Well, all my cousins are the best cousins, but I love Andrew.
All right. So that wraps us up for this show. And we are going to be doing a part 2 later this year at some point when Anthony's going to lead us into a second chapter of this journey. And I can't wait for that because I have some good things that I had to like narrow down from this show. And I didn't want to break up. I didn't know we had a blue theme going until I saw all the covers come in, but I had a very stark red one that I'm glad I have saved for the next show.
Yeah,
So,
would not
I
have
mean,
fit.
Rob came into this with 400 album covers ready to go, so we've got to give Rob a bit more time to get some of his other favorites.
No, I'm not doing any more. I'm done.
But we're having
yeah.
part 2, Rob. You get another 5 later.
No,
in the
I'm
year.
saying they're on the list. I'm not adding to it.
yeah, there. Yep. Got them all.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you all so much for watching along. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for the people who pitched in some comments. It was great to get some interaction from our viewers. And for those listening to this later on the podcast, thank you so much for checking us out. And we will be back in 2 weeks. And we have a show that Anthony has selected for us. And it is going to be what?
Was it bands and their fans?
Yes, it is.
I forget which order I
Good
put
guess.
things in.
Bands
COVID
and their
brain.
fans, the good and the bad. That's going to be interesting.
Mhm.
So everybody join us in a couple of weeks when we have another new episode out. Thank you all so much for joining us and keep rocking on.
Bonsoir.